Well, good morning. How are you? Hey, next weekend, did you hear the announcement? We're not going to be here next weekend. We're going to be at the Capitol Theater. We're kicking off a brand new sermon series called For. I've been asked by people all over the community who don't go to church here, why are you moving to the Capitol? And the answer is for the Ohio Valley. We're moving there because there's 100,000 people within driving distance, within 10 miles of us that don't go to church anywhere. And we're not doing it for us. We're pretty comfortable here. We're doing it for our community and for the Ohio Valley. And we're going to do a sermon series that I think is just going to set up the next leg of where we go as a church and how we love and serve our community and how Jesus is going to reach people by us doing that really well. So it's going to be really exciting, a really exciting sermon series. So be back, not here, but down there next weekend. Hey, we're in a series called I Love My Church. This is the last message of 5. If you've missed any of them, you can go back online and watch. But at the end of the day, I love my church. And I want to share with you today some of the reasons why I love my church and some of the things that God has done over the last 39 years. But in week 1, if you're new, just to catch you up on kind of the series, week 1 we talked about the fact that the church is the people of God living together, and we could probably say this together by now, right? The people of God living together in the presence of God on a mission from God, pushing back the darkness and changing our community one life at a time. That's the church. That, as Jesus defined it, that was the church he was going to build. It's not a building. It's not an organization. It's not one particular leader. It's the people of God together, living in the presence of God, on mission together, doing God's work, reaching out, reaching people, reaching communities together. And wherever God's people are gathered, whether it's in a church building or a theater or down by the river, or wherever you happen to be, that's the church. The church has nothing to do with the building, which is why we're able to make this move to the Capitol on Sunday mornings and go, hey, we're there, we're the church. We could meet anywhere and be the church. The second week, we talked about serving and doing for someone else what God has done for you. And whether you know it or not, before you ever got here, there's been a whole team of people serving in the background so that when you got here, you would have a fantastic experience and be able to concentrate, watching. They're back there watching your kids and welcoming you in and just removing the distractions so that when you got here, you were able to fully engage in what God was saying to you. And now you've been hanging out for a while, and this is your church, and it's your turn to do for someone else what someone else has done for you. And we invited everybody to serve or to come to a volunteer orientation over the past 2 weekends, right? You guys remember that? Nod if you're with me, all right? Over 300 people went through the volunteer orientations, and I want to give those folks a round of applause. So let's just, fantastic. If you missed that, you do not want to miss serving, especially as we embark on this new era, this new season as a church. Exciting stuff is going to be going on, and you're going to want to be a part of it. So if you missed the volunteer orientation, write volunteer or serve on your Connect card, and we will get a hold of you and help you get plugged in and serving. Well, then the following week, I said, part 2, do for someone else what someone's done for you, and that is be an inviter. And I taught you a really, really powerful concept. There are 3 knots. Anybody remember what the 3 knots are? 1, they're not in church. You're in a conversation, and it comes up they're not in church. What do we say? Really? You need to come to church with me this weekend. Things are not going well. Really? You need to come to church with me this weekend. Or they're not prepared for what they're dealing with. They're feeling overwhelmed. Really? You need to come to church with me this weekend. If we can become a church of inviters, we can turn this community upside down, period. But we got to start doing it because the stats tell us that we're not, and it's time to start. And so there's a really easy way to do that. I forget what I talked about last week. Oh yeah, last week I talked about going to the Capitol and all the details. So if you've got questions about that, go back and watch last week's sermon online. And this week we're going to celebrate 39 years of ministry and all that God has done in and through this church over the last 39 years. So if you're visiting with us, it might feel a little bit like we're patting ourselves on the back. We are. But at a crossroads like the one we're at a threshold like the one that we stand at right now, we have to honor the past, we have to honor the people who led us in the past, and we have to celebrate all that God has done. So forgive us if it feels like we're a little self-promotional, because we're not, but we are celebrating what God has done in and through this church. And I think you'll be excited about it. Typically, I teach something out of the Bible, and I got some scripture in there this week, so it's legit, but it's not a Bible teaching. It's more of the story of what God has done in and through our church. Are we cool? You all going to be all right this weekend? Okay, good. All right, so I want to celebrate what God has done. I want to celebrate what God has called us to do, and I want to celebrate who God has called us to be, because I think they're beautiful things, and God has been up to something in Wheeling, West Virginia for 39 years. 39 years. I'm reminded of Psalm 127, verse 1. It says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain." In other words, unless God's hand is on a project or a church, unless his favor is on that, then you're just spinning your wheels. You might as well not even try. And one of the things that I think characterizes the Vineyard in Wheeling through good times and bad times, and there have been bad times, there have been hard times, and there have been really good times. Every organization, every family, every church has a mix of those things. But through all of it, God's hand has been on our church. His favor has been upon us. Two weeks ago, I ran into Marilyn Raz, who is the wife of John Raz, who was the lead pastor of this church for 21 years before I was the lead pastor of this church. Ran into her. They still attend church here. And ran into Marilyn coming up the aisle, and she grabbed me and just kind of smiled and said, "God's favor is on this church. His hand has been on this church all the way along." And I couldn't agree more. I think this church was God's idea, and he has been building it, and he has been faithful to it, and his favor has been on it ever since. And I think as we go through this morning, maybe you'll come to the same conclusion. I'm convinced. So, in 1979, anybody remember 1979? How many of us were alive in 1979? All right, yeah, so in 1979, I was 9 years old. There was a couple out in Southern California named Todd and Debbie Hunter, and Todd had gone through some Bible classes, and they felt like God was calling them to plant a church back east. So, you got a little background on what's going on in 1979. The baby boomers were coming of age. There was a generation gap between them and their parents that was larger than most generation gaps, and so like they didn't want to wear suits to go to church. They didn't want to cut their hair. They didn't want to put on shoes or whatever else they had to do. It was kind of free and easy, and so they were bouncing off of the church and they were missing Jesus. But Jesus was moving in the background, and this movement behind the scenes started to happen. And all these young people started coming to faith in Jesus. And as they started to try and plug into the church as they were taught that they needed to do, they weren't really welcome until they cut their hair, put on a suit, and put on some shoes and took a shower. And so, which I have to agree with the shower part. I'm just saying, that was what were they thinking? Anyway, so they were bouncing off the church. And in Southern California, what began to happen just kind of organically is these young baby boomers started meeting on the beaches of Southern California with a guitar or a couple guitars and hand drum or whatever, and it turned into a church, and it started to grow, and then they began to meet in gymnasiums at schools or auditoriums or whatever, and it grew into what we know today as contemporary church. Come as you are. It was just a whole new style, but guys, this was so foreign to church mindset back then. It was so completely different. And it started in Southern California, and in 1979, it had not reached Wheeling, West Virginia yet, or even most of the East Coast. All right, so Todd and Debbie feel like God is calling them to plant a church back east, to take this new kind of church to the kids back east. The kids. It's so funny, because you're going to see a picture of them here in a minute. They're no longer kids. And so another couple joins them, and they go off for a week, and they pray independently, and they don't talk about anything regarding where they think God's leading them. And for kids from Southern California, back east is Phoenix, right? And so they pray, and they come back together, and independently and unanimously, they felt like God was calling them to West Virginia. which was really strange because they didn't even know West Virginia was a state and had to get out a map to find West Virginia on the map. And they said it was like Todd. I interviewed Todd at one point, and he said it was like West Virginia kind of hologrammed up off the map. And it was just one of those moments where they just knew that was where they were supposed to come. They went away for another week and prayed independently about the city that they were supposed to come to. And independently and unanimously, they came to the conclusion that Wheeling, West Virginia was where they were supposed to come, which is bizarre because if you want to take this new kind of church to the kids back east, the metropolitan center of the cultural center of the east of Wheeling, West Virginia is not, that was a joke. Like, why would you go to Wheeling, West Virginia? Other than that's what God said to do. And so they did. And I'm telling you, this church was God's idea. This was the first vineyard church east of the Mississippi and the 14th vineyard church ever planted in the world. There are now 650 vineyards around the United States and thousands around the world, but we were number 14, and they brought the vineyard here to bring this new type of church to the kids back east because Todd said, and again, as I was interviewing him, you almost could hear his voice crack a little bit. It was just unjust. It was just unjust. It was unjust that a generation of kids was missing Jesus because they couldn't relate to the church. And somebody needs to tell the kids back east and show the kids back east this new kind of church so that they can grow in their faith and they can meet Jesus and they can connect. So that was 39 years ago, 1979. They began in a dorm room at West Liberty. Do we have a picture of the dorm room? Can we throw that up first? This is Rhonda Nicodemus, who was the church secretary here until just a few years ago, from the very beginning. Rhonda had been here since day one, and this is a dorm, we think this is a dorm Bible study, but they began to meet in a dorm room at West Liberty. Then they went to the Temple Shalom and met there for 2 weeks until they found out who we were and kicked us out, and then we ended up at the YWCA, and we met there for a little while, and then landed long-term at Wheeling Country Day School in the gymnasium there, and rolled out carpet and set up chairs every week for over 15 years. We have a picture of the gymnasium there as well. And the church just grew and blossomed, and young people came from all over. And many churches were planted all over the eastern United States from this church, and many lives have been changed directly through the ministry of this church and indirectly through the churches that we've planted, the ministry we've done elsewhere. God has done amazing things and fulfilled, I believe, his purpose for this church, part of his purpose for this church anyway, in planting it here in Wheeling, West Virginia. Now, I asked Todd and Debbie, I contacted them this week and asked them if they would share a little message with us, and they recorded one. So here are the kids from Southern California. Take a look.
Hi, I'm Todd Hunter.
I'm Debbie Hunter.
No, this is the legend, Debbie Hunter. And we're here to just tell you congratulations on your move and 39 years of being in existence.
Yeah, going to Wheeling was the biggest adventure of our lives. We were only 23 and 24, pretty young, didn't know anyone, and we met lifelong friends who are now family. And
we'd never been to Wheeling.
Yeah, we'd never been there.
I personally don't think I'd ever been anywhere east of the Mississippi, and it was the most fun we've ever had. And as Debbie said, we have lifelong friends there that we've never replaced. And as you come to this transition in your history, it's our honor and privilege to see this church thrive after 39 years. I was just thinking today that we actually tried to meet in the Capitol when we first started, and they wouldn't let a church meet there Sunday after Sunday. We did do a couple of concerts there, though.
Yeah, we
did. I remember
yeah.
Phil Kagi, if you're old enough to remember that, Larry Norman. So we had some fun in the Capitol, and we hope you guys do as well. Best blessings to you on your future.
Amen.
How cool is that, huh? And isn't it neat that if they could have, they would have been meeting at the Capitol Theater all along anyway. So we're just fulfilling what they were seeking out in the beginning. Neat folks. Now they went on in around 87 or so to plant a church in Virginia Beach. They handed the church off to somebody who ended up being a really bad actor. And this was one of the hard times in the history of our church, ended up just dividing this church and blowing up the church. And the church really probably wouldn't have made it. In fact, I would say, quite frankly, it would not have made it through that era to this era if it hadn't been for our next pastor, who's John Raz. And John and Marilyn Raz, let's give those guys a round of applause, led this church through a very difficult season. If you've ever been through something like that, you know the pain that's associated with it. And they cared so well for this church. And John shepherded this church along through that season, through a healing process. And after several years, the church began to grow again and really come to life again. But we wouldn't be here today if it weren't for John and Marilyn and their faithfulness to step in a very difficult situation. And John led the building of this building. This building was built in 1986, and we moved, or not 86, 96, and we moved in 97. And so this has been home for the last 21 years, and John led that. He led that move into this building. We got some pictures from those days. I remember I came in 94, so I was there at the groundbreaking as we prayed over the ground and began building what you know as the Vineyard Church building. So go ahead and yep. And there we are with that lovely maroon carpet. It was 1997. And so, anyway. Well, John led faithfully for 21 years and did some just an amazing job. And then in 2010, he grew ill, developed a brain tumor or lesion, or I don't even know what, technically it was. The doctors had a hard time figuring it out. Took him about a year to figure out what was going on. And in that time, that growth in his brain did a lot of damage to the center of his brain. They were able to figure out what was going on, and they were able to treat it, and he's okay, and he's alive today, but he is in a wheelchair because of the damage that was done to his brain. But he's still part of this church. Marilyn is still part of this church. They love their church. They serve, and I love that about this church. I just love that, we're a family, thick and thin, hard things, easy things, we stick with one another. And John and Marilyn, they're actually in this service, and I just want to say, we stand on your shoulders. We stand on your shoulders and Todd and Debbie's shoulders, and And God all along was doing amazing things. Through the good times, through the bad times, he was doing amazing things through this church. One of the things I remember John saying over and over again, and I just started to believe it after a while, and I believe it in the core of who I am today, and that is you can change the world from Wheeling, West Virginia. You can change the world from Wheeling, West Virginia. And God has. God has changed Wheeling, West Virginia from Wheeling, West Virginia through this church, and he's changed lots and lots of lives in this community, but we've really impacted the world. See, part of why they came to the east was to bring this new kind of church. They wanted to be a training center where people could come from all over and learn how to do this new kind of church because it was such a novel new thing. And so people did. They came from all over the eastern United States and they spent time here and they learned how to do it, and then they took it back to their communities and they launched new churches. And so literally thousands of people all over the U.S., eastern U.S., have come to faith through the ministry of this church because we equip their leaders to go back and plant those churches. One of my favorite stories is the Cincinnati Vineyard. We were a part of planting the Cincinnati Vineyard. There was a guy named Steve Sjogren who was planting a church there. And so we partnered with Steve, and he came and learned how to do all that. And then we sent him off, but we went down with a team of people to help that first Sunday. And so we went down to Cincinnati with a group of people to do music and a group of people to do ministry and all this other stuff. And we showed up, and that first week, 40 people showed up. 39 of them were from Wheeling. And then one of them was the janitor who was paid to be there. So nobody showed up that first weekend, but that church today is a church of about 8,000 people in Cincinnati, Ohio. And so these church, we got to be a part of impacting this whole region of the country for the gospel and for Jesus. And we trained up leaders. We planted churches all over the eastern U.S. We even helped inspire the Alpha Course. You probably don't know this story, but if you're not familiar with the Alpha Course, it's something that we run here. It's a 10-week long practical introduction to the Christian faith, and it's life-changing. It's powerful. And we do that. We're going to do that in October. So if you're not signed up yet, sign up for the Alpha Course and plan on coming through the Alpha Course in October, Tuesday nights. A little bit of an infomercial. All right. But here's the deal with Alpha. Alpha is run in multiple languages all over the world. And literally millions of people have come to faith in Jesus through the Alpha Course. Well, back in the early 1980s, before I go there, the Alpha Course was started out of an Anglican church in London called Holy Trinity Brompton. And there was a pastor there named Nicky Gumbel who put it together, and God just put his hand on it, and it's just blown up. I mean, it's nothing short of a move of God. The Alpha Course is so neat. And we're running the folks we work with in Vietnam run the Alpha Course. And so in Vietnamese. It's so cool what's going on with Alpha. At any rate, in the early 80s, the Anglican church was all but dead. And they got wind of the vineyard in the United States, and so they called over to John Wimber, who led the vineyard movement out of Southern California, and said, hey, will you come over and do a conference for us? And John was like, heck yeah, we'll go to England. So he called Todd and Wheeling and said, hey, get together a ministry team. And some of those folks are still here. Some of the folks who actually went over on this trip, early 80s, are still here. So they go over with this team of people and do this conference. Well, there's a guy who is a lawyer at the time sitting in the conference named Nicky Gumbel, who has no intention of being a pastor, is just kind of hanging out, going to this conference. He attends that church, and God rocks his world through that conference and through the ministry of the folks that we sent over. And, the whole direction of his life changes. He ends up becoming a minister in the Church of England. He ends up writing the Alpha Course, and Alpha just blows up and literally has changed millions upon millions of lives, which just goes to show you can change the world from Wheeling, West Virginia, if you will be faithful and bold. And we have been throughout the years. Thousands, if not millions indirectly, of people have been touched through the ministry of the Vineyard Church in Wheeling. Isn't that amazing? It was just awesome to me. I remember about 10 years ago, my son Deuce, who was 3 at the time, we were sitting on the couch watching the CBS morning show on a Saturday morning, and a guy named Don Schoendorfer came on, and they did a 5-minute piece on the free wheelchair mission. And his whole idea was to build a wheelchair that he could build for $50 and ship anywhere in the world. And it was for people in developing countries who don't have wheelchairs, can't get wheelchairs, can't afford wheelchairs, and they're stuck in the back of a hut somewhere, or they're stuck crawling around on the ground, and we're getting them wheelchairs. And so he was doing this bicycle ride across the country to raise awareness and raise money for getting wheelchairs to people. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. After the piece was over, I'm like, I got to meet this guy. So I got online to see if they were going to be riding their bicycles anywhere near Wheeling. And they were coming through Washington, Pennsylvania. So I emailed them and I said, hey, can we, would Don stop and receive a donation and shake a hand? I just want to meet Don and tell him way to go. And they emailed back and said, we see you're a church. Can we come speak at your church on Saturday night? And I said yes, and then I went and asked John for permission, because I wasn't the lead pastor at that point in time. So they show up here on Saturday night, and they give their presentation, and then they had to get back on the road. So we came in Sunday morning, and John had a message planned, and we walked in, and he stopped me, and he said, I think we're supposed to tell their story. I'm going to scrap the message. I think we're supposed to tell their story and ask people to give until it feels good. And this was right during tax return season. He said, I'm going to challenge people to give their whole tax return. And I'm like, wow. And that's bold. So that's what we did. And we told their story, and John got up and said, just give until it feels good. And by the end of that weekend, you guys had pledged $115,000 for wheelchairs. Which is really just the beginning of that story, because I called Don Schoendorfer from the Free Wheelchair Mission, and I said, "Are you sitting down?" He goes, "Well, I'm on my bicycle." And I said, "All right." And so I told him, and he wrecked. No, he didn't wreck. But he said, "If you guys ever want to go on a mission trip and give away wheelchairs, call me," which I mentioned to my friend Larry, who was doing work in Vietnam at the time. And Larry was like, "We're taking wheelchairs to Vietnam." So Larry goes after this thing, gets a hold of Don, arranges to have wheelchairs. So Larry has this whole thing arranged. So Don Schoendorfer and his wife Lori and Larry and I go to Vietnam for 10 days and give away 550 wheelchairs, which was really, really cool. But it began something in Vietnam. Since then, we have given away thousands and thousands and thousands of wheelchairs, which is really nice, and it helps people get off the ground and all that. But it's had a secondary impact, and that's this. We work with the underground church in Vietnam, and we train pastors, and we equip churches, and we resource church plants and do stuff all over the country, which is completely illegal in a communist country. In fact, China is number 39 in the most persecuting countries towards Christians, and we hear all about that all the time. Vietnam's number 17, right? We've had government officials pull us aside and say, "We know what you're doing," and they can repeat back every word we've ever said on a trip, and to our contacts and the people we work with there. "We know exactly what you're doing. Keep doing it." Because a church in Wheeling, West Virginia was willing to open their hearts and give till it felt good. It is blowing open not just doors in Vietnam, but now in Cambodia as we expand the ministry there. Because you can change the world from Wheeling, West Virginia. And God has used you and used us over the last 39 years to do that. We've served our community faithfully through Mercy Ministry. Don and Fran McAfee led that. Don, it was an idea that Don had, and he's like, "We need to serve the poor," and we've been doing that for over 25 years with a whole team of volunteers. Every year we do the community Easter egg hunt, or the Wheeling egg hunt, and serve literally thousands of people. This last year we had about 5,500 people show up, and got to serve them and bless them and love them in just a fun way and invite them to come and see and hear more about Jesus. Same thing with the football and cheer camp, serving our community. Last fall we did Be Rich. Do you guys remember Be Rich? I asked us to can we raise $25,000, and you all raised $45,000, and we gave it all away, and to serve our community. We worked with the St. John's Children's Home and completely renovated their living space so that it felt less like an institution and more like a home. And we got to know those boys. And as we were doing the work, we had a team of people taking them to the zoo and all over town, a hockey game, and out for dinner, and they never go out for dinner, and all these other things. And now these kids show up here consistently. We have folks who've made relationships with them, and they show up. But that was just the start. I mean, we donated enough money to build 2 gardens in 2 schools in Wheeling, one of which is Madison, and we got hands-on and our hands in the dirt building that one. We made enough food to feed the homeless population through the freeze shelter for the entire winter, and it all tasted like popsicles because it was in the freezer with the popsicles down at Ziegenfelder's. It goes on and on and on, because that's the heart of this church. God put a heart of service in this church from the very beginning, and we are known, if you talk to people in the community, as a church who loves their community, and I want to see that grow more and more in the days ahead. It's why I love my church. I love my church because Jesus' hand is on this church, because Jesus is building the house. He always has been, and he always will be, as long as we are the people of God living together in the presence of God. And this is really important, and we stay on the mission from God. He's with us. He is with us. And it's why I love my church. I love my church because you guys are the best people on the planet. Yeah. When I travel around and talk with other pastors, I go to pastor things, it's really boring. You'd hate it. But they ask me, "Tell us about your church." And all I can say is I work with the best people on the planet. Like, they're the most generous, giving, loving, grace-oriented people that you can imagine. And I love that about our church. I love the culture of our church. You know, the culture of this church has always been very down to earth, very real. You know, there's even the pastor even sometimes preaches in flip-flops and shorts. I know, oh, heaven forbid. Yeah. Anyway, it's always been real and down to earth. It's always been okay to not be okay. It's just not okay to stay that way. You always come as you are, and you'll be welcome. That's always been the culture of our church, and it's always been fun because we don't take ourselves terribly seriously. We take Jesus very seriously, but we do not take ourselves seriously. So we can laugh at ourselves, and we can laugh with one another, and it's really one of the happiest places on earth, even as we walk through struggles together. And I love the love, if you can love the love. I love the love. When I came to this church in 1994, one of the things that struck me from the very beginning, and really the reason I stayed, was because I felt loved. I felt a part of the community within weeks. I felt like, man, I'm going to be missed if I'm not there. Like people genuinely love me, and that has always been a part of the culture of our church, and people still to this day say the same thing. And I love my church because we get at the very heart of who we are, we get that there are people who don't know yet, and it's our mission to help them find out. You know, when Todd Hunter said it was just unjust, it was unjust that a generation of people were missing Jesus because they couldn't connect with the church. I mean, that goes back to the very beginning. I remember in 2000, I was at a conference in Anaheim, California, where Todd spoke. And I could take you to where I was sitting and where he was standing. And he said something that I think just defines the culture, again, who we are as a church. And it goes all the way back to the beginning. It's our DNA. He said, the church is one of the few organizations on the planet that exists primarily for those who aren't here yet. The church is one of the few organizations on the planet that exists for those who aren't here yet. That's a profound statement, isn't it? But that's who we are. That's who God planted us to be. That's our DNA, and it's part of why I love my church. And I love my church because we love Jesus. I mean, there is a passion for Jesus here. It is all about Jesus. And we worship him passionately, and we follow him passionately, and we take him seriously, but we don't take ourselves too seriously along the way. And these are all things that God has sown into who we are, and I believe will be a part of who we are for years and years and years to come. You know, I love my church because of all of that, but I love my church because of what he's called us to do. Because of what he called us to do. We're making this move next weekend. Does anybody know where we're going next weekend? I keep forgetting. I do. We're going to the Capitol, and that seems like a big deal, and it is a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal. But in the bigger picture of things, there's so much more that I believe God is up to. And I've shared this before, but just for those of you who weren't here when I did, if you look at this map, step one is to reach this community. We have 100,000 people within 10 miles of our church who don't go to church anywhere. We want to reach them. We want to be a church for them. If we can't seat them all, 100,000, that's going to be tough. We'll figure it out, though, because but we're going to go after that 100,000 people. But it doesn't stop there, because we have towns all around us that are just far enough away that it's a hard invite. And so we're looking at the Ohio Valley, looking at planting churches north, south, east, and west. This has been part of the plan for a long time, and it's not gone away. We are going to do this in the next couple of years. But there's a bigger plan. Remember how Todd said it was just unjust that people were missing Jesus because they couldn't connect with the church? Well, in the state of West Virginia, we are one of the most under-churched regions of the country, and it's not because people are against God, it's because that nobody went there to plant next generation churches. It's because the churches that exist primarily were were designed for people who lived 100 years ago. And so you've got not just one generation, you've got 2 or 3 generations of people who are missing Jesus because they're bouncing off the church. And I got to thinking about that. Why would God send Todd and Debbie to Wheeling, West Virginia? Because he could have reached the East Coast and Eastern United States probably better from Pittsburgh or D.C. or Charlotte or somewhere like that, but he didn't. He sent them to Wheeling, West Virginia, and he accomplished it from Wheeling, West Virginia. But why Wheeling, West Virginia? And maybe, just maybe, it's so that we can carry on that same heart, that same mission for a group of people in a state who are missing Jesus because nobody wanted to tell them. Bill can go build a church and churches and a whole network of churches that people can relate to so that they can find Jesus and they're not bouncing off of the church and missing Jesus because of it. I think that's part of it. It's been an amazing 39 years, guys, hasn't it? I mean, what God has done, and he's not finished yet. We're just getting started. We're just getting started. I say this not to take anything away from the last 39 years, because I think the last 39 years have been nothing short of miraculous. And I think the people that God has called and their willingness to say yes and step in and lead has been amazing. Let's give them another round of applause. But I believe our best is yet to come. I believe our biggest impact is yet to come, and it's all built on this foundation that has been laid for us. We stand on their shoulders, and we stand on what they have built here, and it's so very good. So next week, we take a big step. Next week, we take a big step in this journey to a new location, a new reach, with a vision of reaching so many people in the Ohio Valley that we literally change the culture of the Ohio Valley. Guys, and I believe that the church is the best equipped organization to do that, because Jesus changes people from the inside out. And when people are changed from the inside out, cultures begin to change. And we are equipped to do that. So I'm praying for 10%, and I want to invite you to pray for 10%. 10% of our community. And the reason is because if you can influence 10% of a community, you can change the culture of that community. And that is a God-sized prayer. I mean, we can't make that happen. Only God can make that. Only a move of God could do that. But that's what I'm praying for, and I want to invite you to pray with me and to pray consistently and to not stop praying. And when we get to 10%, then we'll pray for 20. But we'll start with 10 for now. So will you join me in this? Will you join me in praying for our church and for our community, for our region and for our state? Will you join me in serving? If you're not signed up to serve, write serve on your Connect card and jump in. You do not want to miss out on this. And will you join me in inviting people to church? You know, last week or 2 weeks ago, I shared that only 2% of us invite people to church in any given year. And that if we could turn that number upside down, if we could even get to 10%, but I'm telling you, if we can get to 98%, if we can turn that number upside down, God will turn this community upside down. We are set up to do it, guys. But it's you and you and you and you and you praying, serving, and inviting people to come to church. Really, you need to come to church with me next week. And inviting people to come and see and learn more. You are the X factor. You are the plan. Jesus basically said, yeah, I could snap my fingers and make all this happen, but that's not the plan. You're the plan. Go get them. One at a time. Push back the darkness, one life at a time. One community at a time. And that is what we have been called to do. So buckle up. It's been quite a ride, but we're just getting started. And the reason is because we're not content to just sit around and talk about it. We're doing it. We're doing it. And because God has found a group of people in Wheeling, West Virginia, who are willing to do whatever it takes short of sin to reach people who don't know yet. This is like a powder keg of holy goodness right here in this room. And at the end of the day, we are We are the people of God living in the presence of God on a mission from God, pushing back the darkness and changing our community, changing our region, changing our state, one life at a time. Amen.